Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks so much for being here. I want to question a narrative that we're being told by Joe Biden, and it's about the Afghans fighting. Did the Afghans fight in the last couple of days, and are they currently fighting now? We're told one thing, but I don't think these people deserve our trust, quite frankly. Do you still believe them? Do you believe, after lying to us for 18 years about this and a year and a half about COVID, you trust these people? I don't. I'm going to question all the narratives they feed us. Now, it's been a while since I've been to Afghanistan. Let's see, what day? It's the I've never been to Afghanistan. And I have no plans to anytime soon. So it's hard for me to make an assessment of whether or not the Afghans have been fighting for their country or not. I can't. How could I possibly know? But Biden keeps telling me that they're not fighting. And again, I'm inclined to question everything he tells me because we've been lied to nonstop about everything always. Why would they start telling the truth now? So the main argument, and this is literally the main argument from Joe Biden, this is the number one argument he's making, is that there's nothing we Americans could do in Afghanistan anymore. We did the best we could, and the Afghan people, they won't fight for themselves. So it's time to come home. There's nothing we can do. Here's his big primetime address, or I guess it wasn't primetime, it was just the other day, his big address to the nation. He said this point 6 times. Now, this is the buck stops with me speech, by the way. Buck stops with me, and also, here's 6 times me blaming the Afghans.
So what's happened? Afghanistan political leaders gave up and fled the country. The Afghan military collapsed, sometime without trying to fight. American troops cannot and should not be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight for themselves. We gave them every chance to determine their own future. What we could not provide them was the will to fight for that future. Here's what I believe to my core. It is wrong to order American troops to step up when Afghanistan's own armed forces would not. Mr. Ghani insisted the Afghan forces would fight, but obviously he was wrong. How many more generations of America's daughters and sons would you have me send to fight Afghanistan's civil war when Afghan troops will not?
It's actually pretty odd if you think about it, why he keeps mentioning that over and over. And again, do any of these people deserve our trust? He doubled down on one of those lines we played. He tweeted this out. He said this line, American troops cannot and should not be fighting and dying in a war that Afghan forces are by and large not willing to fight and die for themselves. So what's the truth? Well, here's maybe a more complete story, is that apparently almost 70,000 Afghan troops have died fighting the Taliban in just the last 7 years. More Afghans and their military died fighting the Taliban last year than Americans have died in 20. Lara Logan has been reporting that Afghan men have been fighting until they're out of ammo and then engaging in close combat with the Taliban as they knock door to door to kill them. So again, I don't know. I'm not going to pretend here to say, I can't sit here and pretend that they're not fighting or like, oh no, they're fighting. I don't know. But I do know it's very easy to sit here in America and say, oh, you didn't fight, right? You didn't fight for your country as we're sitting here and the Taliban are knocking on their door. You with me? It's really easy to say, come on, Afghan, be a man, fight for your country. When honestly, the truth is, a majority of Americans wouldn't fight for their country right now. If we had, I want to try to relate it to America, but it's tough because we can't even think about it. But there's no correlation here. But I bet if you took Americans and put them in this position to the Afghans, a lot of these Afghan men are in. I don't think most of these people would fight either. China is going to attack Taiwan any minute now. There's no question about it. And what are the men of Taiwan going to do? They'll probably give up because there's no hope of winning. Not when Americans won't help too, right? So we're going to criticize them too. Gosh, it's easy to criticize them. But what would we do? You know the expression, remember the Alamo? Why? Why is that an expression? Why are we told to remember it? Right? You don't hear that with anything else. You don't hear remember D-Day. But it's not, why is remember the Alamo a thing? Because fighting to the death is rare. Fighting to the death for a righteous cause against obviously insurmountable odds is rare. Maybe that's the more specific line. Because fighting to the death, I guess, isn't that rare. It's fighting to the death for a righteous cause that you believe in so much that you will fight to the death even in the face of obvious insurmountable enemy. And you're still gonna fight until you die. You are choosing death over living under the enemy's thumb. That is rare. So you need to remember it. You need to remember it so that when that moment comes for you, you can make the same hard choice. Does that make sense? The normal thing when you're facing insurmountable odds against a military, the normal thing is to give up. Right? Maybe that's even the more rational choice in a way. Someone could say that's the more rational thing to do, right? You're assessing your chances of winning. And you look at it, you're like, that doesn't look good. We're probably gonna lose this. Most people would choose to live. Even if it's under the slavery of the enemy, the slavery of the Taliban, the slavery of the communists. Most people will choose life over dying for a cause. And I think most Americans would too. I think when we talk about Afghans being cowards and not fighting, we focus on like those in the military and stuff, right? And like, okay, a lot of those people have been dragged out of their homes and shot in the head. But what about your average Afghan, your average shopkeeper, right? And that's what most Americans are just average people. Most Americans have no idea even what's going on in Afghanistan right now, right? Like most people don't, like you pay attention. You're here. You're choosing to spend your time here on the first TV. And you could be anywhere, and I'm so grateful for that, right? But you obviously care, and you're in the top like 1% of people who understand and are informed and care. Most people don't. Most people don't know what's going on. And that's true in Afghanistan too. Most people, they're just like shopkeepers. So the Taliban comes in and says, hey, support us or I'm gonna shoot you in the head. So what's the average shopkeeper gonna do? Fight to the death? Nah, they don't, no, they just want whatever, they don't care. So they're like, yeah, Taliban, whatever. We love the Taliban, I love the Taliban. And they live. And so would most Americans. This is why I get so frustrated. It was the California Restaurant Association talking about vaccine passports. And they said, they're like, fine, if agreeing to vaccine passports means that we can do this, this, and this, then we'll accept the terms here. It's like, oh, you guys are just negotiating. It's like hostage negotiation, right? You're negotiating with terrorists. You're like, yeah, I'll do this thing that I don't want to do if it means you can please let me do these other things. Right? Most Americans won't draw a line in the sand and fight and say, no, I'm not letting you pass this mark. No, it's not happening. Most people will be like, okay, government, okay, whatever you say. We see it all around us with COVID. You think it'd be any different if the stakes were higher? If the stakes were truly life or death, do you think people would take a stand then? No way. If people won't take a stand now, they're not gonna take a stand when things are life or death. So it's easy to criticize the Afghans for not fighting if that's even true, but most Americans wouldn't. That's why this country is such a miracle. In 1776, our colonists, fought against all odds, against the greatest military power in the world, and they won. Unfortunately, so did the Taliban. But you see my point, right? We can't be critical of the Afghans for not fighting. I guess you can, you can. But I'm not sure most Americans would either. So we better remind ourselves who we are. You better remember the Alamo and remind ourselves who we are and who you are and what your ideals are that you believe in, and is it worth fighting and dying for or not? I mean, listen, Patrick Henry said, give me liberty or give me death. Nathan Hale said, I regret that I have but one life to lose for my country. John Stark said, live free or die. That's the story of America. This is who we are. It's rare. Remember it. That's my first one. Second point in this segment. We don't like nuance. And Biden is giving us a false choice. He's saying, listen, we either had to leave like this or we add 100,000 Americans forever. You're like, no, that's not. Almost everyone was for leaving. And when I say leaving, it could be with no troops or it could be with 2,500 Americans, which is like basically nothing, right? So it's somewhere, everyone was for pretty much somewhere between the 0 and 2,500. So don't believe this Biden false choice that it was either the way we left or 100,000 Americans forever and people dying. No, that's not. So we got to understand the nuance of what's possible here. Libertarian Robbie Suave, he said both of these things are true. First, it was absolutely the time to get out of Afghanistan. And Biden was right to ignore the generals who lied to us. Great. And leaving our allies and translators in the lurch was a massive bureaucratic failure. Both of those things can be true at the same time. Don't let them gaslight you into thinking, oh, well, I didn't want to send 100,000 troops there, so I guess this was the best option we could do. No. There were other options. And then Biden's claim that we didn't evacuate more Afghans sooner because many Afghans didn't want to leave. Of course there's going to be a few people who want to go down and they're so dedicated to the mission, they're not going to leave no matter what. Okay, sure, that's going to be a handful. But if you just look at the backlog for visa applications, just the backlog, there were 18,000 primary visa applications and 53,000 family members. So you got over 70,000 just visa applications in the backlog. These are people who wanted to leave, but it was never a priority for us. And we were worried about, and that's a shame. That's a travesty. Has horrific ramifications and implications around the world for a long time. The fact that was not a priority for us. And it's not even necessarily moving these Afghans to Texas or wherever. We could have helped them get to Uzbekistan or Tajikistan or anything. Right? So the fact that that wasn't a priority was helping our allies there is a major problem. But also, we were worried about signaling to the Taliban that we were about to leave and we didn't want to cause any panic. And it reminds me of this story out of Vietnam. This is the story of Lionel Rosenblatt and Craig Johnstone. These are two State Department employees. This is in Vietnam, and it was in the final days of the war there. And of course, we've all seen this picture of us leaving the top of the embassy in a scramble, mad scramble to get out. Right? It was 46 years ago as Saigon was falling. Now, at that moment there were 174,000 Vietnamese people that the Americans needed to evacuate. Henry Kissinger called it an irreducible list. Okay, so these are the people. No fewer. 174,000, it's a lot. Henry Kissinger told the embassy, get on it, make it happen, evacuate these people. But the ambassador didn't because he didn't want to cause any panic. Right? He didn't want to signal to everyone that we were leaving. He didn't want to cause any panic, so he just didn't do anything. So some people who are wanting to follow those orders told the ambassador, they're like, listen, you got to cut down this tree. There's a tamarind tree in the middle of the embassy, big giant tree. We got to cut it down so that we can make an emergency helicopter landing area and help people get out. And he said, no. There's the same picture. Now you can see the tree. And he said, no, because that would signal to the world that we're about to leave. And then it all collapsed. And then we had to have the panicked retreat from the roof. And you can see in that color photo, it's a little more clear now that you know that tree that your eyes overlooked in the first picture. Now you know the significance of that tree there. And the same thing happened here 46 years later. We didn't want to have the fear was there'd be this mass exodus, mass panic, I should say, because we were trying to get people out of there quickly. Now these two men who I just mentioned, they didn't leave when they could have. Instead, they posed as French businessmen, and they went all across Saigon, and they told as many Vietnamese people as they could on that list that you have to leave now. That's something else that we can't imagine in our life. You have to leave now. Not in 10 minutes, not tomorrow morning, now. And the ones who said okay, they gave them cash to bribe the security guards to get wherever they needed to go to evacuate. These 2 Americans did not stop to eat or sleep for 5 days, and they evacuated 200 people. After that, they were called into Kissinger's office. They were going to get reprimanded, maybe even arrested for being so reckless and irresponsible and disobeying orders. And then Kissinger leaned back in his chair and he told the men, I hope that I would be as courageous as you two if I were in your position. Rescuing our allies, as many as they could, single-handedly. And I remember that story, and I think of how many stories like this are going on right now. How many desperate last-ditch efforts are there to rescue Americans and Afghans? Officially, the government is saying, actually we got a clip we'll play in the next segment, that they're not guaranteeing anything. I hope one day we hear these stories. But also know that it didn't have to end this way. And that's on Biden. The Afghanistan war is on a lot of people. This exit, this failure, this betrayal, that's on Biden. Friendly reminder to download our newsletter. It's great. 2 things. You can download our app for free in the App Store. It's awesome. And then we have our newsletter, which is great. They work real hard on it. It's a wonderful resource for you to set your head right, know what's important, and know the right way to frame it before you go out into the world and bombarded with lies everywhere you go. You can download it, or excuse me, you can sign up for it for free, of course, on thefirsttv.com. More Afghanistan coming up. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. On my radio show yesterday, and I'm sure you've heard many of these stories as well, we shared stories of Afghans who have helped America and Americans for many years. And by the way, we were there to help them. They helped us. We helped each other, right? But what they did and how we left them behind. I'm on the side that they deserve to be vetted properly and come to America, or at least we can work with neighboring countries in Afghanistan, to send them to Uzbekistan or whatever, right? We owe them at least that to get them out of harm's way. But from their perspective, it's just betrayal. The Afghans were betrayed, and betrayal is the worst thing there is. It's the lowest pit of hell in Dante's Inferno. And the stories are horrific now. And because of Biden's bumbling exit, there's only one way out. It's the airport. And we're bragging, I guess, now that we control the airport, but the Taliban controls every way to get to the airport. The State Department sent out this memo saying, hey, if you have a ticket or whatever, you have a visa and you can go get to the airport. But then the last line of the memo is like, oh, by the way, good luck. The last line there. We cannot guarantee your security as you make your trip. What? I thought that was fake when I first saw it. So this is the National Security Advisor. This is our National Security Advisor when asked about our effort, not even just to get Afghans out, but to get Americans. Here's what he said.
If that mission is not complete by August 31st, and there are Americans and Afghan allies who remain there, will U.S. troops stay until everyone is out, or will they leave?
So I'm not going to comment on hypotheticals. What I'm going to do is stay focused on the task at hand, which is getting as many people out as rapidly as possible, and we will take that day by day.
So you can't commit to bringing back every American.
Hypothetical. Getting every American out is a hypothetical. At least the British version of him said we won't. They said we're going to try, but we're not going to. It won't happen. At least he was honest. But how about the fact that bringing back, this is, again, I know I started off the segment talking about Afghans. This is bringing back every American. It's like, They said something the other day, our White House did, that, the Taliban has assured us that they're going to let Americans get to the airport. Oh, great, we're operating on Taliban assurance. And the ones, of course, who don't make it are going to be killed. They're dead. Shot in the head. Shot in the head if they're lucky. Probably hung in the middle of the town or burned alive. We can't imagine it. We have no place for this in our brain. Right? That's why it doesn't, like, people are scared of the virus. You kidding me? You kidding me? People scared of a virus with a 99.99% survival rate? Imagine living in fear of having a 100% chance of getting your head cut off if someone in the Taliban sees you. We're not even close. We're not like light years away from understanding that fear and that terror that would grip you and that desperation that you would have. No one is any close to any idea close to what that's like. I want to share this here in a tweet I saw that just has too much snark for me to even handle. This first tweet, it was in response to this tweet. This tweet is from a woman. She is a national security fellow at the Institute for the Study of War. She's an associate fellow at the International Center for the Study of Radicalization. And she's a visiting fellow at the National Security Institute. So she's a senior fellow, an associate fellow, and a visiting fellow. And listen, I'm sure she's a very nice person. And after perusing her Twitter, her and I probably agree on lots of different things. And this is not an attack on her. It's an attack on her profession. And in this tweet, I don't think she's talking about veterans either. Of course, veterans have a lot of pain. We talked about that on the radio show as well. I think she's talking to her fellow national security fellows and visiting fellows and senior fellows and associate fellows. Here's what she said. She said, it's a very dark day in Afghanistan. Take care of yourself. Not veterans, not people in Afghanistan, people in D.C. It might require avoiding the news. Even that can be excruciating, I know. We can and should bear witness. But it does not require self-harm. Triggering PTSD symptoms or new trauma does not help the Afghans. What? And someone wrote back, yes, with the chaos engulfing the people of Afghanistan, I too would like to extend my warmest and most heartfelt well wishes to the senior fellows and visiting scholars who are suffering through this very difficult time. No one on earth can imagine what you must be going through, but you are seen. Dripping with sarcasm, I hope that comes through. This woman's experienced nothing. Again, I want to pick on her. The visiting fellows, the senior fellows at the think tanks in D.C. over the last 20 years, they've experienced nothing compared to our veterans or compared to the Afghans who we've left behind. Jesse Kelly, he says, wait until you find out that they, the elites, they're not embarrassed by anything. They're not doing some honest self-assessment right now. They're just figuring out how to navigate 72 hours of bad press. That's their top priority. No one's going to be fired. No visiting fellow will consider a career change. None of them are going to say, geez, you know what? Wow, I've been so wrong about everything. Maybe this just isn't the job for me. No general will step down. Nothing will change. Just people will talk about their mental health and then get a paycheck in the mail on Friday. And they'll be fine. And we'll still go nation build again. And we won't learn a single lesson from this. The elites won't because they paid no price. They pretend to pay a price. And that's what that tweet was. They pretend to pay a price. Talk about how excruciating this is to watch. Not to live, to watch. That's the key. Because first of all, these people in Afghanistan and the American citizens in Afghanistan, they're not tweeting. They're busy, living, trying to not die. Right? But it is excruciating to watch from the safe distance of Washington, D.C. So be careful for your PTSD ladies. You have no idea. You're not cowering in fear in your home, waiting for someone to knock at the door to shoot you in the head. Give me a break. An Afghan vet wrote about an Afghan interpreter that he knew who was hung in the street last night. They melted his DOD, his Department of Defense ID, into his chest, cut off his arms, killed his family, and his 10-year-old daughter was spared and handed off to Taliban leadership. And spared means her life is going to be worse than death, perhaps. The people in D.C. will be fine. They'll pretend to be distraught. Their paycheck will come just the same. They have nice food, nice apartment, and nothing in their life will change. It's just like COVID. Nothing in their life has changed. So it'll never end. We're going to do it all over again. All right. What do we do? What do we do? I want to share this advice from C.S. Lewis. And this is such good advice because it's, well, anything that's principally true can be applied to many different things. Right? So this can be applied to Afghanistan and COVID and just the general situation we're in right now in our country. And Afghanistan and COVID are very similar, if for nothing else, just how we've been deliberately misled for almost start to finish with both of them. And both perhaps had noble intentions in the beginning and then mutated into something else much more sinister altogether. Alas, here is the great C.S. Lewis. So C.S. Lewis served in World War I, and then he was potentially maybe going to serve in World War II as well. But someone asked him, this is in 1948, someone asked him, how are we to live in an atomic age? We've got the nuclear bomb now. People are scared. What are we going to do now, living where we have this nuclear bomb, we can just kill a bunch of people at a push of a button? He says, why, as you would have lived in the 16th century, when the plague visited London almost every year. Or as you would have lived in a Viking age, when raiders from Scandinavia might land and cut your throat at night. Or indeed, as you're already living in the age of cancer, an age of paralysis, an age of air raids, an age of railway accidents, an age of motor accidents. In other words, do not let us begin by exaggerating the novelty of our situation. Believe me, dear sir, madam, you and all whom you love were already sentenced to death before the atomic bomb was invented. And quite a high percentage of us were going to die in unpleasant ways. This goes back to a theme we've talked about a lot, that our panic of COVID was because we've not contemplated our mortality. And here's C.S. Lewis saying, oh, don't worry, you were already going to die. Last part. This is the first point then to be made, and the first action to be taken is to pull ourselves together. If we're going to be destroyed by an atomic bomb, let that bomb come when it finds us doing sensible and human things. Praying, working, teaching, reading, listening to music, bathing the children, playing tennis, chatting to our friends over a pint and a game of darts. Not huddled together like frightened sheep and thinking about bombs. They may break our bodies. A microbe or a virus can do that, but they need not dominate our minds. Pull ourselves together and go do human things. I love how he says that. He doesn't just say, go do normal things. He could have said normal things, go do practical things, or go do regular things. He said, go do human things. Pray, work, teach, raise your kids, go be with friends, even at the risk of death, even at the risk of an atomic bomb coming down or a virus going to kill you. Go do human things. You know, New Zealand shut down, locked down again because of a single case of COVID. Huddled in fear. It's pathetic. But do human things as opposed to what? Sheep-like things. Cowering in fear. But even bigger picture, just pull yourself together, people. Because much worse is to come. And I'm grateful in a way. Listen to what I'm saying here. I'm pretty sure my kids will not grow up in a time, they're 1, 3, and 4. They're not going to grow up in a time when America is the superpower of the world. And in a way, maybe that's a good thing. Because they can fight to get it back. I got to go here, but one last thing. What does pulling yourself together look like? Steven Pinker, he wrote a book called How the Mind Works. He said, the study of happiness often sounds like a sermon for traditional values. The numbers show it's not the rich, privileged, or good-looking who are happy. It's those who have spouses, friends, religion, and challenging, meaningful work. Isn't that what we talked about last week? Right? The communists want you, how do we put it? Sick. Is it dumb, sick, and lost? So get smart, healthy, and saved. Let's get back to basics as a country and as a citizen. And let's make our lives and our country something worth fighting for again. Coming up next, we'll talk about women in Afghanistan as the White House tells us that, the Taliban is going to be a very inclusive government. Lie, lie, lie all day long. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Taliban's now back in power, and here's our national security advisor talking about how inclusive they're going to be.
The UN Security Council issued a joint press statement earlier today calling for a new government that is united, inclusive, and representative, including with the full and meaningful participation of women.
Gosh, you couldn't even spit it out without stumbling over himself. And now we have this report of the Taliban killing women in the streets for not wearing their burqa. And there's tons of examples of this. And note this as well. It's been 18 years since the Taliban has been in power. And the median age of a person in Afghanistan is 18. So literally half the country has never seen the Taliban in complete power. And they sure will now. Megan Mobbs is here. She's a West Point grad, Army Afghan vet, visiting fellow at the Independent Women's Forum, also at Soldier Strong, and writes the Veterans blog at Psychology Today. Megan, how are you today?
I'm good, Mike. How are you doing?
Really grateful you're here. Let's start with you and your fellow vets. What have you heard, and how should one who served there and saw terrible things interpret what's happening now?
I think there's a genuine sense of absolute betrayal by our government. There is so much guilt and shame and anger and sadness by what's happening. And I think that it's a very tenuous situation on the ground, but I think it's a very tenuous situation for our veterans at home and for their family members who have sacrificed so much only to watch it fall apart in such a catastrophic, irresponsible way. Now, that being said, I think every Afghan veteran should be proud of their service. They kept that country, safe for 20 years. We had no terrorist attack launched from that country in 20 years, which was the goal. We killed Osama bin Laden, and they should be proud of their service, but they should be absolutely furious at our government for how they've bungled this withdrawal.
Yeah, you can be both those things, right?
Absolutely.
I heard an analogy. I heard just now, I want to see what you think. It was from Tim Kennedy. He said, listen, a cancer doctor can work with a patient, have ups and downs, and in the end still lose the patient. And we don't, call the doctor, what I mean? You get the analogy. How do you do that? How does one separate these two things and find this nuance and say, I did a noble, good thing in as good of a way as I possibly could, but man, that sure ended in failure?
Because I think the reality is that, if you're boots on the ground, if you're a soldier, right, you had your small slice of Afghanistan you were responsible for. You are not responsible for the failed strategy of the United States government. And so being focused on what you achieved in your mission, I think, is how you get through this.
Yep, that's right. That's the answer. Let's pivot over to the women over there. So you were a woman over there. What did you see about how women were treated?
So I didn't interact that much with the women populace, but you played that clip before, right, about an inclusive government. It's going to be inclusive for everyone except women and children. This is going to be absolutely devastating for them. They're going to lose everything that we work towards. And the one hope that I have in all of this is you can't unlearn an education. We spent 20 years making sure women had access to education, to jobs, and you just can't snatch that all away. Now, they're going to try, and we're already seeing that, right? They're going to try to terrify women. They're erasing pictures of women. And my hope is that this has begun something. We've planted a seed of some type of freedom for these women to move forward.
Women here, a lot of complaining here about being a woman in America, right? We have no space in our brain for what it's like to be a woman in Afghanistan. Can you paint some sort of picture to help us understand that?
Absolutely not. We can wear what we want. We can work in the jobs that we want. We can walk down the street without fearing of being accosted. We don't have to be escorted anywhere. Under Sharia law, you have none of that. You can't get an education. You can't work. You can't leave your home without a male escort. We have no idea what that's like here in this nation. We have so much freedom, so many things, economic opportunity, the freedom to choose our job, our partner. So we just don't have any idea what it's like for them.
How naive is this idea that they're going to have not only an inclusive government, but just like play nice? Like there's like this weird, even the head of the military in England did an interview last night, and he was like, well, let's not call them our enemy. And he said, we're going to have an inclusive government. We expect them to have an inclusive government. And the reporter said, except for women. And he kind of chuckled. And he's like, well, let's take a wait and see approach. I mean, just based on your experience, how long do we have to wait and see with the Taliban?
None. We don't even have to wait now. We're seeing it as it's happening. We had to wait literally 0 seconds for this to happen, right? There is not going to be an inclusive government. We shouldn't take them at their word. And again, they're erasing women's pictures in the streets and telling women to go back in their homes. We've seen it with our correspondents on the ground being able to uncover their heads and now having to be fully covered. So the idea that we're going to have to wait any time is false because it's already happening.
Remember the Afghan papers that came out in 2019? They talked a lot about how we would try to force gender equality into their culture, and it obviously didn't work. I think they said we spent at least $787 million with different gender programs. And there was some benefit, right? I mean, you talked about women's literacy increased a bit, and we had girls in school, and there were some things. But it was really hard to make major cultural inroads when it came to gender stereotypes. They didn't even have a word in their language for gender or gender equality. Like, that wasn't even a concept. What could we have done, right? What could be done in the future?
I think it's one of these things, right? It's a square peg round hole. We tried to force our way of life, our belief system on a country that was never going to believe that way. And to your point, that we did see inroads. There's a female mayor in Herat, which is one of the biggest cities in Afghanistan. And so there were strides that were made. And now they're saying they're just waiting to be slaughtered, right? We abandoned them when we were really trying to do some of these things to help them stand on their own 2 feet. And obviously, there's so much evidence to suggest veterans wanted to leave, the American public wanted to leave. We should never be in nation building and forever wars. And there is a lot of evidence to suggest countries that allow women to participate in the economy do better and they're more stable. So I think looking at that in the future, we just have to make sure that we don't invest all of this money only in the last minute to pull the plug and expect, all of this not to fall apart on us.
Yeah. Okay. Well, last word of your fellow vets, word of encouragement.
Again, be proud of what you did. We served our nation, right? We went there because of 9/11. When our country called, all of us volunteered. We showed up, and that is what we should be proud of. This is a failure of our government. This is a failure of our senior military leadership. It is not a failure of the men and women that served on the ground in our country.
That's truth. That is so true. Well said. Megan, where can people learn more about you and follow you?
They can follow me on Twitter at Mobs Mentality or on Instagram at Mobs Mentality, or you can read my blog on Psychology Today called The Debrief.
I like that, Mobs Mentality. Megan Mobs, appreciate you, Megan.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks. Have a wonderful day. Coming up next, one of our favorite guests, we're going to talk about education. And again, it goes back to the first segment of the show. Like, do we believe America is a country even worth fighting for? Or will we roll over when the time gets tough as well? And the way we're teaching our kids, we're not right now. We're not in a good path. Talk more about that coming up next. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. We kicked off the show talking about, are we a country that's worth fighting for? Are we a country that most people think would be worth fighting for? Or will we roll over when an enemy comes just the same? Well, we're teaching our kids that we're sure not a country worth fighting for, and that's something to be pretty concerned about. This is, what did she say, a pre-K teacher, a preschool, or young kid? So imagine giving your kid to this person.
Story time. This has been my first year in preschool with a class of my own, teaching alongside another queer neurodivergent educator, and we have been rocking our twos class. We've been talking about gender and skin color and consent and empathy and our bodies and autonomy. It's been fabulous. But our teaching team is shifting and a new person is being onboarded, someone with many years of experience. So today at the lunch table, when the topic of gender and genitals came up, one of our students plainly looked up and said, "Well, I'm a girl today, but I know that teacher Co isn't. No, they're NB." And the look on the incoming teacher's face was priceless. She was shocked in a good way, and she just looked around at the two of us and said, "This class is incredible, and I am so impressed."
I want to pass it off to our queer and neurodivergent correspondent. Not that he is, that you're just the correspondent of those things. Ari Hoffman's here from the Post Millennial and KVI AM 570. Ari, how are you, brother?
I'm great. That's definitely the first time I've ever been described as that, though.
You could be our official correspondent of those things if you'd like. If the title's open right now, the job's open. What the heck? What are we doing?
What I don't understand is why are you discussing these things in school? I mean, I can't imagine having these kind of conversations. You used to talk about this kind of stuff in school with students that accuse you of being a child predator or something, discussing genitals. Isn't that a term of grooming? I don't really understand this. And meanwhile, this is a kind of teacher that I'm sure the Taliban would be very accepting of right now. I mean, you haven't heard much from the woke brigade this week, probably because they see what's going on in Afghanistan going, well, you know, we can't really say how bad America is when everybody's watching that on TV. Yeah.
You're so right about the grooming and the perversion of it. And what I'm so disturbed by are not only that young teacher, right, but her story of the older it's like the people who go along with this. I was wrong, Ari, I was like, oh, this stuff will just stay on college campuses, and as soon as they graduate, they'll enter the real world, and they'll get slapped across the face with reality and knock it off. But they didn't. Adults are caving to all this stuff. What's that about?
Well, it's because corporations are so worried about getting canceled or having people boycott their product. They think that the majority of their customers are the woke brigade. But if you look at the sports industry for a minute, you look at basketball, you look at baseball, you look at football, everybody's viewership is down. Now, let's be fair. Everybody's viewership is down to begin with also because people have more options, more choices of what to watch. But then it went down dramatically when they started with this whole woke nonsense, because the people who watch these kind of sports are the people who stand for the flag, the people who sing the Pledge of Allegiance proudly, and the people who are used to a more traditional America. And they don't know what to make of all this kind of stuff. And they want to watch a game. They don't want to be lectured on how racist or bigoted they are.
You're in Seattle, which is one of the woke hotspots, especially when it comes to the school boards. Have the school boards changed at all? Have they either changed their mind or changed their votes, or are we seeing a change in their actual makeup?
Well, nothing's really changed, and I don't really expect it to change. And fortunately, in our last primary, it looks like people are voting for the most extreme on the left rather than actually voting for any common sense. So I'm a little concerned about the direction that's going. But at the same time, I do see waiting lists at all the local private schools. And I'm wondering when parents are going to rise up and say, you know what, I take that back. I'm wondering when the GOP is going to say, why do we keep advocating for these schools to reopen when we know we're sending them into brainwashing factories? What they should really be doing is saying, you know what, enough of this. We want vouchers. We want charter schools. No more of this nonsense. They've been brainwashing kids for 20, 30 years. And what you're seeing in that video and others is the result of that.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's amazing that the GOP has not been able to take advantage of the fact that the schools were closed for almost 2 years to end the government's grip on public education, right? If they couldn't do it then, when could they ever possibly do it? What's the deal with masks on kids in Washington?
Well, we're about to find out if teachers are going to be mandated to get vaccinated today. I think it's all likely that they will. Last week, the superintendent of public instruction said that he was advocating for mandatory vaccines. Now, I have a question. Here in Washington state, they prioritize teachers and prisoners and other people before the people who had pre-existing conditions and the elderly. So they've had the most amount of time to get vaccinated. If these sophisticated and educated people are not getting vaccinated, don't you think that should be an indication of a bigger problem? But no, now they're going to mandate it. And you're seeing a lot of parents push back on this now, even those that are vaccinated, saying if they're mandating this, what are they going to mandate next? And now you see the wait list of the private schools getting longer and longer. So I think that you may have actually reached a tipping point.
Well, I hope. Here in California, we have masks on all kids, 2 and up, just psychotic. We do have mandate vaccines for the teachers. So what is next? It's the vaccine for the kids, probably, right? Or because it'll never end. So where do you see this going next if we don't draw a line in the sand and stop it now?
Well, the question is really how many more stimulus spending packages can the Democrats get out of all this? They've been winning elections. They've been winning arguments because they say everything's an excuse because of COVID. They're using COVID as an excuse for everything, rather. And you see that ongoing, and it's just going to keep happening. Meanwhile, Dr. Anthony Fauci himself said that hopefully there's no long-term lasting effects on the kids from the masks. You're telling me with all the millions of dollars that's being funded into research, nobody has studied this, and now for 2 years you've mandated that the kids wear these things? Meanwhile, there's a great article in the Wall Street Journal a couple weeks ago by 2 masking advocates who say that masking kids is a terrible, terrible idea, and here's all the health reasons why. And then it got suppressed. It got buried. You haven't seen much about that because they called it like it was. I mean, I take my kid for a minute. He puts on his mask, sneezes into it, pulls it off, does this, then shoves the mask back in his pocket, along with what other candy and whatever else ends up in there. And then the next day he's like, hey, same pair of pants, puts the mask back on. How is that possibly healthy for anybody?
Yeah. Amazing. Ari Hoffman, our neurodivergent correspondent, post-millennial, KVI AM 570. Ari, I won't introduce you like that again. Hope you come back.
Oh, good. Anytime.
Thanks, brother. Have a good day. True story, Mike Slater. We're talking about the Afghan papers coming up tomorrow. Spread the word.